Welcome to the Leading Owls podcast, brought to you by Rice University's Doerr Institute for New Leaders. Each week, we bring you inspiring stories and practical tips from successful student leaders, faculty, and staff, along with leadership experts and coaches that will help guide you in your own leadership journey. As we step into 2025, it's the perfect time to reflect on how we can grow, lead, and make this our best year yet. Today, we're honored to be joined by Bernie Banks, Director of the Doerr Institute for New Leaders at Rice University, and a renowned expert in leadership and organizational change. With a career spanning academia, the military, and global consulting, Bernie has a unique perspective on what it takes to lead with impact. From heading West Point's Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership to guiding top organizations worldwide, his experience speaks volumes. In this episode, Bernie dives into the power of accountability and how it can be a game changer for your success in 2025. We'll explore how holding yourself and others accountable builds trust, drives growth, and creates high-performing teams. Bernie also shares practical tips for fostering accountability in your personal life, work, and leadership journey. If you're ready to start the new year strong and take your leadership to the next level, this conversation will leave you inspired and equipped with actionable strategies to make this your year of impact. Please welcome Bernie. Hi, Bernie. Thanks for joining us.
Well, hello, Kelly. Thank you for having me.
Let's just jump right into accountability. How do you personally define accountability in a leadership context?
Well, being a leader requires accountability. And so when you think about leadership accountability, it's a two-part answer. The willingness to take ownership for one's own actions and the willingness to take ownership for the actions of those who directly fall within your span of influence.
And what is the role of accountability in effective leadership?
Leaders are responsible for getting things done. Consequently, the ability to get things done is highly correlated with the level of accountability that's present in a situation. It might take much longer to get something done if there's a lack of accountability. Conversely, if there is accountability present at all times, then you can accomplish things faster and is highly likely that you'll also do them to standard.
How can the leaders hold themselves accountable, especially in challenging or high-stakes situations?
When holding oneself accountable, it's important to understand what matters to you. You can also leverage others as a vehicle for ensuring that you stay committed to acting in a manner consistent with things you value and the standards you espouse. Reflecting is a way in which you can ensure that your actions are withstanding deviations from those standards or values, if you would. And then finally, consistently seeking feedback so that others can provide you an awareness of how you're doing along the way.
When you talk about reflecting, is that something you do daily, weekly? Is there like a time that you sit down to do, or is it just constant?
I think you should always be looking to think about not just what you're doing, but how you're doing it. In terms of engaging in a formal process, that might happen at periodic intervals throughout an activity. In terms of embodying a personal commitment to reflecting, that can happen at any time. For example, I frequently take time when I'm in the gym to reflect on activities that are transpiring in my life, whether personally or professionally.
The gym seems like a good place. You can zone out there.
Yeah, well, you've got a time in between each set and you're pretty focused. I think for me, it works well because that's an activity I take part in every day. So I have a standing commitment to work on myself. One of the ways in which I can work on myself and become a better agent on behalf of others is by taking that time to work out, not just physically, but also mentally.
I love that. What are some common barriers to accountability and how can leaders work to overcome them?
Well, we're all human beings and consequently fall prey to a number of things. A desire to be liked, not wanting to be seen as the bad person, not wanting to be seen as overbearing. The list goes on and on. When you know that those things are present, you can leverage others in service of helping you to overcome those perceived barriers. Also, having clarity as to why is it important to do something always matters. Many times people think about accountability as if it's a bad word, but in the best organizations and in the best people, accountability is the word. Anything you care about, you should be willing to hold to account because that's how you demonstrate a true commitment to doing the right thing.
Now, everyone who works for you knows you have the best stories.
I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I definitely have stories.
So can you share an example of a time when holding someone accountable led to significant growth or improvement in your past?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was a young officer in the military, I was serving as the number 2 formal leader in an organization consisting of 110 people. And we had a new officer who had been in the organization just a few weeks, and he was kind of struggling. He was having a hard time meeting the organizational standards. The number one leader in the organization had kind of written him off. And so one day, this individual was late for a meeting that the unit was having. And consequently, I confronted him about that. And he quickly became very angry, started to emote, if you would. We have a verbal altercation, and he quickly departs the area. A few hours later, he comes back. And at that time, I asked him, "Are you ready to finally talk?" And I said, "My job is to make sure that you are successful. This organization needs you to be successful. You have others that directly rely on you. And so I am going to confront you when I see that you're not acting in accordance with established standards and when you're not doing what's necessary to meet the mission. While others might have written you off, I have not. So what's it going to take for us to put you in a position whereby you can ultimately win?" And as a result of that conversation, it started a process of him turning things around. He started to lean into doing what was necessary to actually become a competent leader in that environment, because it was a high stakes environment. The standards were very high. And so the fact that he got started out slow to some was concerning, but to me, it simply meant he would require more effort. And when he finally started to recognize that there were people there who were actually committed to his success, not simply committed to judging him, it started to lead to a path of improvement. And he later on became a very successful individual inside that organization. But it started with a conversation that initially was kind of, I won't say difficult, but confrontational. But ultimately, it ended with him knowing there are people who have my back. And that's what started the improvement.
I think that's such a neat way to reframe it for him. He assumed everyone was judging him and thinking poorly of him, and you were just trying to help him.
Yeah, and we all feel judged at times, right? The challenge for all of us is, can we suspend judgment and extend assistance? You get far more out of trying to help people than you do out of trying to judge people. You get way more loyalty and trust when people believe that you actually are concerned about their well-being and not simply concerned about your own well-being.
A lot of people don't realize how much accountability can impact trust and build morale on a team. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Oh, absolutely. So when you think about trust and the role it plays, it's been said that we only move at the speed of trust. If you want to hold people to account, they have to believe that you're doing so is designed to put them in a better place. Because if they believe that you're trying to hold them to account, but that you don't really have their best interest in mind, you're just trying to advance your own, and that if they don't meet up to whatever expectations you have, that you're going to simply cut them loose or punish them, then they're going to hold back. And so if you really want to foster accountability, you have to create an environment that's characterized by a high degree of trust, because then people will take risk and still feel safety while doing so. So accountability and trust go hand in hand.
What role does feedback play in the accountability process, and how can leaders provide it constructively? I guess that we could probably go on that for a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
But just a couple tips.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're thinking about accountability, one of the things that I love is an article that was written in 2016 by Peter Bergman in the Harvard Business Review, and he gave a 5-step framework for fostering accountability. And he said, you must have clear expectations, clear capability, which means providing people that which is necessary to meet those expectations, clear measurement, clear feedback, and clear consequence. Feedback is a vehicle for helping people to understand where they're at relative to meeting the expectation. If you don't set a clear expectation and provide people an awareness of how they're doing relative to meeting that expectation along the way, then you're kind of just using hope as a method to bring about a desired outcome. Feedback is absolutely essential. But once again, feedback should not be a vehicle for simply passing judgment. Great feedback, proper feedback, is devoid of judgment. It's behaviorally anchored, it's objective, delivered in a timely manner, and it's also something that transpires routinely. Feedback helps us to understand where we're at and what it'll take to ultimately get to where we're desirous of going. Feedback is a good thing.
I like that. And I like that it added routinely,
Yes. It should be episodic.
Yeah.
Right? Get all the way to the end of something and say, well, you're not quite doing things the way I thought you would or I hoped you would. And you're like, what? Well, you never told me anything. If you had told me stuff all along, I could have adjusted my actions. But now we're at a point where it's too late. You're dissatisfied. I now feel as if I wasn't adequately supported. So no one really wins in that scenario because there wasn't effective dialogue and communication all along the path. Feedback always matters.
Yeah, that's very, very key. All along the path. I love that. How can leaders encourage accountability without creating a fear-based environment? I think students struggle with this a lot. They don't know how to get their peers to be accountable without being mean, I guess.
I think you have to convey what are the benefits one will accrue from being accountable. Ultimately, you're trying to help people achieve things that matter to them and also matter to those they have a relationship with. If you can communicate the value associated with achieving the expectation, then it becomes a lot easier as you progress along that path to say, hey, we're either doing what's necessary to achieve the outcome and reap the reward, or we're not doing it. And we need to adjust our actions so that ultimately we can end up achieving the outcome and reaping the benefit. So when dealing with their peers, they have to be able to communicate and say, here's how actually doing this is going to turn things in a better direction for you. Because if they don't understand the benefit, they don't value the consequence, it's going to be really hard to hold someone's feet to the fire all along the way.
What advice would you give to emerging leaders on establishing accountability from the outset of their career?
Well, I think it starts with self. Don't ask of others that you're not willing to do personally. You have to role model the behavior you want to see embodied by others. And so the best thing you can do is start with really working on what will it take to hold yourself accountable. And then people will start to learn from your example. And when you ask them to start doing things, they'll say, okay, I trust this person because they've demonstrated a willingness to do that which is being asked of me. Young leaders need to first and foremost become competent. They need to lean into knowing what are the actual requirements of my role. Additionally, they need to continue to refine their character. Competence and character matter. Ultimately, I'd say character matters more than competence. But you have to, as a young leader, lean into what does it take for me to become competent in my role? And how do I ensure that my actions are in keeping with the actions I want to see being undertaken by those around me?
How do you approach accountability in your own work at the Doerr Institute, and what practices do you find most effective?
Well, I think it starts once again with those clear expectations. At the Doerr Institute, we have a set of standing, what we call first principles that we always anchor back on when thinking about any activity we are committed to undertaking in service of developing students at Rice University. And so those principles serve as a guidepost, if you would, in addition to the university's values. Those are clear expectations the Institute has of its own members. And then Rice's values are clear expectations we have ensuring that our actions can pass through the filter that are the values so that anything we do is viewed as legitimate. Having those touch points and then also establishing clear objectives and key results that we're committed to pursuing allow us to examine our actions on a daily basis to say, are we doing the right things the right way for the right reasons?
What is one strategy you recommend for leaders to build a culture of accountability within their teams?
It always comes back to what behaviors are you reinforcing and what behaviors are you trying to sunset? Culture is all about behaviors, norms, values, beliefs. So have you been clear with folks on what are the habits we need to embrace and what are those habits we need to sunset or replace? Feedback allows you to do that well. Like, yes, that is exactly what we're about here. Keep that up. Good job. And when you see something that's not in keeping with what you're about, highlight it and say, hey, here's why we need to stop doing that. And let me know what assistance you will require as we kind of get that moved out of here. So it's not a part of who we are and how we operate. Behavior is the key because behavior can be observed, measured, modified. And culture is not something that are just thoughts in your head, but they're behaviors that drive your actions or reflected of your actions. And so making things behavioral is very, very important.
And what's one strategy that listeners can take away for promoting accountability in themselves?
I think when you can apply process, you're always going to be better off. There are a number of things you can do routinely to become more accountable. In the military, we used to do a series of inspections. Those inspections were always done at periodic intervals based on activities that we were going to undertake. But those inspections were a form of accountability. So before we go do something, we'd ensure, hey, Do you have all your required equipment? We call that a pre-combat check. Then there was another inspection. Is all your required equipment working properly? We call that a pre-combat inspection. And then when we came back from doing a mission, we checked to see, do we still have all of our required equipment? That was called a post-combat check. And so we had a series of inspections that we did habitually. And those things were all designed to foster accountability. Engaging in structured reflection, what we called an after-action review, was another accountability tool. And so we had a number of practices that we habitually employed, all in service of creating an environment that was characterized by accountability. So when you have practices you can employ, not just statements you make, it can change everything. So you can embed those practices into your environment to create a climate and a culture that celebrates being accountable.
I like the idea of giving yourself an inspection.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because of having spent so long in the military, there are things that you do that just become part of your daily routine. For example, if I wear a dress shirt and I'm wearing pants, I will always line up this line here with my belt buckle with the seam on my jeans or trousers.
Wow.
And we call that a gig line, and they all have to be straight.
Wow.
And still to this day, I do that. It is a personal inspection to ensure that I'm dressed properly. And there are countless other little things just like that I do that are personal inspections to ensure that I'm staying committed to honoring standards and doing the right thing in little ways every single day. And so, that goes back to habit. That goes back to routine. That goes back to valuing what I'm doing. To many, they're like, why is it important that line lines up? And it comes back to how you want to present self to the world and how you represent the organization you're a part of and your commitment to ensuring that that organization is viewed in a favorable manner. And so little things can have powerful consequences. It matters how I show up in a variety of ways every single day because it's not about me. It's about those I represent.
That is really, really cool. I love that. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your background on accountability, how our leaders, our student leaders and beyond can implement that in their teams and in themselves, and for sharing your wisdom with us.
I don't know if I have wisdom, but I got a lot of thought. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the Leading Owls podcast. We will be back next week with more leadership journeys and tips to share. New episodes release each Wednesday. For more information on the Doerr Institute for New Leaders and our free leader development programs for Rice students, please visit doerr.rice.edu.